good afternoon or good evening, again, depending on when you're watching this video. I'd like to thank all of you that are watching the videos and reading the text and taking the quizzes. Had about half of you again last week do it. We're going to try to encourage you to do a little bit more than that. As you saw from the email, there are some incentives now. You can actually improve your letter grade from what you had on March 13th. So pay attention to the videos. Read the textbook, take your time and do the quiz, and make sure you're getting the questions correct. Okay. This week we're going to do chapter 13. Hopefully you've been enjoying the warm weather. Mr. Ward has. He's wearing shorts, so you're seeing something that pretty much no one has ever seen before. Mr. Ward teaching in shorts. So there you go. I hope that you are getting outside a little bit, still socially distancing yourself and being safe as we are enjoying the warm weather. Okay. Chapter 13 is similar to chapter 12, again, in that we're going to talk about statistics that measure how the economy is doing. Last chapter we looked at real GDP, and GDP is a measure of how the economy is doing, whether we're producing more goods and services or fewer goods and services. We looked at poverty rates as a way of determining how the economy is doing. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, more people are going to be living in poverty, and that's a sign the economy is not doing well. Chapter 13 is going to look at three other things. We're going to look at the unemployment rate, we're going to look at the rate of inflation, and in section 1 here, we're going to be looking at what we call the business cycles. Our economy is like a roller coaster. That's why in the book, it's got a picture of the roller coaster, because our economy goes through ups and downs, much like a roller coaster. Okay? We call that the business cycle. Our economy goes through ups and downs. Different than a roller coaster, the ups are more fun in the economy. When the economy is going up, that's more fun. When the economy is going down, that's not as much fun. Of course, on a roller coaster, the downs are a lot more fun. Okay? So the business cycle, or the regular ups and downs of the economy, are measured by real GDP. And as we looked at last chapter, real GDP is a measurement of our country's output of goods and services. When we take into account inflation, that's the real part, but GDP measures whether the economy is producing more goods and services or less goods and services. So our economy does go through ups and downs. Much like a roller coaster, our economy goes up, and then down and up and potentially way down into what we call the business cycle. Okay? When real GDP is going up, so every month, every quarter, every year, government economists are measuring whether real GDP is going up. That is, are we producing more goods and services? Okay? So if you saw a statistic that said real GDP was up 2% during the first quarter. A quarter is 3 months of the year. So that means that real GDP has gone up 2%. That means we're producing 2% more houses and cars and car washes and haircuts and mowing lawns or cleaning pools. If the economy is growing, we call that an expansion. So when the economy is growing, that's called an expansion, and that's good, because when the economy is growing, real GDP is going up, our standard of living tends to go up because we're producing more goods and services. But just like at the roller coaster, it's eventually going to reach the top. We call that a peak. So the economy is going to stop growing, and then it's going to go down. Okay? The down is called a recession. So when real GDP is going down for 2 consecutive quarters, that's the formal definition. When real GDP is going down for at least 6 straight months, we say the economy has entered into a recession. Okay? Unfortunately, that's where we're at today. Real GDP, because of the pandemic, has started to go down. People are not working, so they're not producing goods and services. Okay? During a recession, real GDP is going down. The economy is producing fewer goods and services, which means ultimately if we're making fewer goods and services, then more people are going to lose their jobs. Because if we're not going to make as much, we don't need to hire as many workers. If the economy is producing fewer goods and services, that means people's standard of living tends to go down because we don't have as many goods and services to enjoy. Okay? A recession typically, the economy typically goes down for about a year at a time. Okay? When the economy goes into a recession, the distance from the peak to what we call a trough is typically about a year. Typically, expansions last for 4 or 5 years. So the economy grows for 4 or 5 years, and then it goes down for about a year. And then after it bottoms out, the economy recovers and goes into another expansion. Okay? And so this is a typical business cycle. The economy grows for 4 or 5 years, then it goes down for a year or so, and then it starts to go up for 4 or 5 years, and then it goes down again. Okay? The length of time and the severity of the recession does vary. Sometimes the recession could be as short as 6 or 8 months. Sometimes it could last a year, 2, or a little bit longer. Okay? Rarely longer than 2 years. Unfortunately, economists are predicting this recession could last quite a long time, a year or longer, into maybe 2 years. Okay? But eventually the economy will stop declining and will start to improve again. Okay? And that's the business cycle is, the consistent ups and downs of the economy. Now, if the economy goes into a really long and very bad recession, that could be considered a depression. There's no formal definition for a depression. Like we say, the formal definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters or 6 months of declining GDP. A depression is a much longer. In fact, if you remember, the Great Depression lasted like 8 years, okay? 8 or 9 years, and it was a very severe recession. Okay? We're going to talk later on at the end of this chapter on the unemployment rate. Okay? The unemployment rate will typically rise during a recession. During the Great Recession that we had in 2008, 2009, and almost into 2010, the unemployment rate reached about 10%. That was a pretty deep recession. That's why they called it in the media the Great Recession. During the Great Depression, the unemployment rate reached over 25%. Okay, and we'll talk about the unemployment rate in section 3. But a depression is when the economy is experiencing a very severe and long-term recession. We had a depression in the 1890s. That's not the most famous one. The most famous one, the one you remember from your history books, of course, the Great Depression, started with the stock market crash in 1929, and it lasted all the way until World War II, when we started to ramp up production of goods and services to fight the war. Okay, so that was obviously a very long time. Okay? The recession that we're currently in could be very long, could be very bad. And so we might be, I don't think, but we could be eventually entering into a depression. I don't think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be a significant recession, but I don't think it will last the years, the amount of time that the Great Depression did. As the economy begins to open back up and people go back to work, we'll start to turn that recession back into an expansion. Okay? So we know that the economy goes through ups and downs. The question is, what causes these ups and downs? What causes the economy to grow and then conversely sometimes to go into a recession? Okay? There are 4 things the book talks about. We're going to talk about 3 of them. One of them is changes in investment spending. Changes in investment spending. Okay? When the economy is going down, a recession is when real GDP is going down. Well, remember this formula from the last chapter. Well, one of the things that drives the economy down is if one of these sectors in the economy starts to spend less. Okay? And we talk about the investment sector or businesses. Okay? There's an economic theory that says all recessions are driven first by the investment or the business sector. When they start spending less, that causes GDP to go down. And we'll talk in chapter 15 what that impact has on the rest of the economy. But one of the first things the book talks about is when businesses decide to spend less. Okay? Well, that would cause the economy to go down. Conversely, if businesses are spending more, well, then that would cause the economy to experience an expansion. Another one is monetary policy decisions. Okay, we're going to talk again in chapter 14 next week on the Federal Reserve, and they get to determine what they call monetary policy or interest rates in our economy. Okay? When interest rates are going down, the Fed is trying to drive the economy up, trying to help the economy grow, because lower interest rates encourage people to spend money, and that helps to expand the economy. Okay? There are times when the Fed will raise interest rates, and we'll talk again next week why that is, but higher interest rates can also slow the economy down and cause a recession. So there's changes in business spending or investment spending, there's monetary policy, and then the last one is what we call external shocks. External shocks are things that happen outside the economy that have an impact on the economy. Okay? Before the pandemic, when I was teaching this, I would talk about hurricanes or surge in oil prices or wars. Okay? Those are things that happen outside the economy that can drive the economy through ups and downs. Well, we have unfortunately, a perfect example with the pandemic. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, okay, that's thrown our economy into a recession as we've quarantined people and closed businesses. People aren't able to earn money, people aren't able to produce goods and services, and so the economy is being thrown into a recession by the pandemic. Okay? I'm hopeful, like all of you are, that we can get back to normal. Okay? When the economy does get back to normal, whether that's in a month from now, or 2 months, or 3 months, or 4 months, the economy will go back into an expansion when the pandemic and all of this stuff is behind us and we can start to go forward. Okay? So the economy, like the roller coaster, goes through ups and downs. You know now what drives those ups and downs. Okay? Changes in investment spending, changes in monetary policy, external shocks like a pandemic. Okay? So the economy goes through ups and downs. Okay? So we learned way back in chapter 1 that economists like to describe what's going on in the economy. The economy is going through an expansion or a recession. We want to analyze why that's happening, a pandemic, okay, or changes in business spending. We want to be able to explain, using a graph or a chart, why the economy is doing that. But the last thing that we want to do in economics is be able to make predictions. So if you skip over a couple of pages in your book, okay, you'll see that they talk about forecasting business cycles. We want to be able to predict what direction the economy is going to go in. Much like we want to be able to predict what the weather is going to be like, so we can prepare to either grab an umbrella or a coat, or whether we're going to be wearing shorts. We want to be able to make predictions about the weather. We want to be able to make predictions about the economy. And how do we do that? Well, we use statistics. Okay? Much like your grade point average and your extracurricular activities could help predict how you will do in college. We can use those statistics. We can use economic statistics to determine what direction the economy is going to go in. For example, if the unemployment rate is rising, if wages are stagnating or going down, if the average work week is going down, if people are working fewer hours a week or more hours a week, that will tend to predict, those statistics will tend to predict what direction the economy is going in. And so one of the things that economists use is called the index of leading economic indicators. It's a series of 10 statistics that they put into a formula, and then they watch the outcome from that formula. And if the outcome from that formula is changing, In other words, it was going up and now it's starting to go down. Well, that's a prediction that the economy is going to be entering into a recession. If that index, those 10 statistics, when they start to go down, or when they stop going down and they start to go up, that's a sign that the economy is going to turn around and go into an expansion. Okay? So every month, economists are looking at these 10 statistics as a group because they tend to predict or forecast what direction the economy is going to go in. Okay? So that ends section 1. Okay, we've looked at the economy going through ups and downs. Again, these are statistics or ways of describing how the economy is doing. And then section 2 on inflation, and then section 3 on unemployment, we're going to also look at statistics that measure how the economy is doing.